Hey, welcome back, everybody, to today's edition of Uncork on Twitch. As promised last week, or as I mentioned last week, we're going to try to come to you on a weekly basis. So we're back 1 week later, and we're going to keep up this cadence for you. We've got tons and tons of great things that we want to talk about. And if we did it every 2 weeks, we would never get through all the wonderful things that Uncork can do for you. So last time around, as you know, we did part one of a UDLC series. I had Director of Engineering Roberto Busso Garcia join me for that. We're going to continue talking about the UDLC today. And if you want to learn more about what the UDLC was, please go check out, that slide and hear it in Roberto's words. But today we've got another special guest as we go to the next part where we're going to focus on testing and debugging. And that is Russell Epstein, who is a senior engineer here at Uncork. So Russell, why don't you introduce yourself to the crowd?
Great. Thanks, Nick. So as Nick said, my name is Russell Epstein. I started my career as a developer. Then 3 years ago, actually from tomorrow, I joined Uncork as a solution architect, where I worked on a bunch of different client deliveries for banks and insurance companies, and most notably, the New York City government, where we actually built an Uber Eats type of application to help deliver free food for New York City residents as soon as the global pandemic started. Eventually, I transitioned to solution engineer, where my main focus now is building these internal tools focused around the software development lifecycle, and also just helping other Uncork users build apps more easily and efficiently. So just a couple cool things I've built with Uncork for Uncork would be the Uncork Marketplace, which we use. It's basically a library of pre-made templates and snippets that Uncork users can go to help accelerate their build time. And I'm also currently building a version control system. So Nick, maybe you'll have me back in a few weeks once that goes live to walk through that as well.
Did you just commit to version control being done in a few weeks, Russell?
Well, who knows when people are going to be watching this, right? In a year from now.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Yeah. Wow. I didn't realize tomorrow is officially 3 years for you. Congratulations. Happy early Uncorkiversary. And look, Russell and I have been through a lot together in the 3 years that he's been here. He was with me from the beginning when we really started down this UDLC journey. We were working very closely on the New York City project and some of the great applications we built for them. So it means a lot for me to have, Russell on the broadcast today to talk to you. Like I said, we've been through, a lot. So yeah, cool. So as we said, we're going to dive more into the UDLC, testing and debugging. And again, this is stuff that's Uncork built. So features built with Uncork, really once again showing you the power of the codeless standard, the power of no code as a development platform, where it doesn't just mean going and building, what your client asks. It means building things that help you. It means building things that, speak to developers and everyone out there like you. So, again, we're really excited about all this stuff. And actually, so today, Russell was telling me that his demo has to do with movies. So I realized I don't have a lot of movie-related gear, but back to my wardrobe choices, I thought this t-shirt kind of looks like a movie screen or TV screen. It's a stretch. I know, like I said, I'm not fashionable, so I got to make these stretches. And my background here, more importantly, is my favorite movie, and I hope many other people's favorite movies, and The Big Lebowski. So I would love to sit down and have a conversation with the dude and Walter. So with that being said, I'm going to kick it over to Russell to pretty much take it from here and, talk about what he built and how he's able to use some of the UDLC to help him do it. So Russell, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you. So today I'm going to be going over two tools specifically, the service logs dashboard and the testing tool. So in order to actually understand the benefits that these tools can get, I created a demo application with the movie theme in mind that Nick mentioned. So I created just a very simple application. It has two modules. There's a user interface module called Browse Movies, which calls an API module, passes in some parameter, gets a list of movies, and then displays them in a table. And then, so this is the front end module, the module that we'll be previewing. And then this is the API module. So this module has a plugin which calls an external service, which Nick showed how easy it is to integrate with services in a previous one. But this calls an external service, this movie database API. It's an open API that anyone can use to access and then get a list of movies. So I'm interfacing with this to get a list of movies and show it to the user. So what does this tool or what does this app look like? Something like this. So I can see a list of movies. Right now, there's only two categories to sort by: popularity or revenue. If I switch to revenue, then it's going to show me the movies which generated the most revenue. So Avatar is at the top. This movie rating threshold, this basically is just a way for me to say, I deem that I care about movies that where the average rating is 7 out of 10 or better. And these suggestions are based on what my movie rating threshold is. So 7 was an arbitrary number. Maybe I'm not that picky, and I think movies that have 5 stars overall or 5 out of 10 overall rating is sufficient. So I can lower this, and as I lower it, more movies get suggested to me. Or if I become a pickier movie watcher and raise this up, then less and less movies get suggested for me. So this is a somewhat working application. I'm going to break it, and then we are going to debug it, and I'll show you how the service logs tool can help you debug it. So just to note, so this average rating here, 7.4, this is an aggregated mean from all of the movies that get returned here. So I'm going to make it in this API module. This plugin calls this data workflow, and this data workflow is the one that's doing the calculation to get that average rating. I'm going to not trigger this data workflow. So if I remove this from the post trigger and then refresh the screen, so now you see everything looks like it's working, but this average rating now is showing none. And if I didn't just delete that, I would not be sure why it's showing none, and I would need to investigate why. So that's where the service logs dashboard comes to play. So just to introduce the tool, the service logs dashboard shows every single network call that was made in an environment with specific details like what user made the call, the date and time that the call was made. Even the request and the response body that's getting passed through the network is shown here, which all are extremely helpful metrics when you're trying to investigate an issue in a specific module or a service. This tool also really is just a front-end module for the documented endpoint of the services endpoint that exists in Uncork today. Realistically, anyone can take that endpoint and then build some type of functionality on top of it. We built this as an easy way to interface with it with the different filters, but anyone can take that endpoint and customize it to whatever application they're building in order to help monitor their app and focus, really hone in on the debugging.
Yeah, what I actually love, just to sorry to interrupt you there,
No worries.
yeah, service logs. What's interesting about it too is, for folks who want a little history lesson on service log, this was actually built originally for compliance reasons, right? So thinking about some of the industries that Uncork works in and the highly regulated nature of them, there was a need to effectively track a lot of the interactions that are happening. Every API call being made, what data was sent to it, what data came back, by whom, and all that kind of stuff. So, compliance was what it came out, and very quickly, a lot of our creators discovered this is a wonderful debugging tool to give you that rich insight into all of the interconnectivity between your applications. So, I just wanted to bring that up because, I think that's the beautiful thing about Uncork, is that, any feature that comes out is just available to you to make of it what you want. And we just give it to you in a way that you can do that. Like, hey, here's these logs as a service. Go do what you want with them. Go put it into some compliance tool if you need, or go build it for your debugging. It's entirely up to you how you want to use some of these features. So I think that's just a really special aspect of it. And and of course, this is also for anyone curious. There's a lot of data being captured, and it's all happening within your instance of Uncork, right? It's very important, for a lot of our clients, or for anyone in an enterprise, that your data stays within your world. At least, the very sensitive data that comes with, the kind of calls that get made here. This is only available to this instance. This doesn't go off to some other system or anything. So that's all I just wanted to add there. Russell, I'll kick it back over to you and finish showing you how to debug Rotten Tomatoes here.
Great. Thanks for the clarity, Nick. So yeah, I'm trying to figure out why my front end module isn't displaying that average reviews, average rating score that should have been generated from my API module. So there's a few different ways I can try to, dive in and start investigating this. The easiest way would be probably by filtering by the specific service. So I know that I created an external service called Movie Database. So I can quickly just search for that service, and it's just going to show me every single log that exists that this movie database service was used and called out. So I can see here, this is the last log that was ran for this service. Maybe that module isn't actually using a service, and I'm just calling another endpoint that I configured directly into my plugin. I don't need to select a service. I could instead just find that API module. So discover modules, discover movies API, and I can apply the filter. And now this is showing me every single time that API module was called from somewhere within this environment. Pretty similar, but the service is happening within this API module, where this call is being made from another place, in this instance from my user interface. There's other things that I can do to filter. If I know the date range of the log that I'm trying to find, maybe I'm a production engineer or production support engineer, and I'm on the phone with a client and they're trying to fill out an application and they can't submit their form for some reason. If I know the date range or a specific time frame that I can kind of dive into to help them find their log, then I can fill that in and filter by a specific date range. I can also filter by the user ID. So if Bob Smith is the one on the phone and he's telling me his email address and he can't get into the system, then I can filter by a specific user and then find their logs and kind of investigate what's going on there. One last filter that I want to call out is the request key and the request value, or the response key and the response value filter. So I can actually filter the logs specifically by what's being sent in the body. So for example, in this API module, every time I change the sort by from popularity to revenue, the sort by field is getting passed into that API module. So if I only want to see the logs where data.sortby is popularity.desc, then I can do that. And now all of the logs here are only going to show me the ones where popularity is the field or the value being passed in. I could also change this to revenue and filter only the logs where revenue is the field being passed in. This is a very basic example, so it's not the best display of how to use these, but when there's a lot of data being sent and specific fields that you're looking for, maybe there's an outage in New York City and you want to just see all of the requests being made where region equals New York City. That's where this can really come into play and then help you understand the logs and what's going on there. So I'm just going to pick this log here.
Yeah, just say that's like that's my favorite part. I'm glad you're able to show that, because I just remember using a lot of logging tools, and oftentimes the bodies don't get captured, right? Again, you don't want to send that off to some external system, and the way you got to look for it is very difficult. And just like you said, to say, hey, we have a problem for anyone who's submitting New York as a region. Let's go look at the world of those people, and what can you do with that? I mean, you could look at multiple different scenarios where the problem goes wrong, and you can have different test cases that you can run to figure out why is New York failing, maybe with combinations of other attributes of the request. You can also figure out who could have been impacted by this, right? Like, let's say everyone who's in New York is having trouble submitting an application through your application, or submitting something through your application, and you need to do outreach and say, hey, we need to go to everybody who tried to submit with New York and submit it on their behalf, or contact them and excuse me, tell them that they can go fix something now, or give them a freebie because they had a problem on your website. I don't know, whatever it could be. Bottom line is you can easily just use this to find the world of people who might have been impacted by a given problem. So, I think the use cases, as you go through this, just keep growing.
Absolutely. And, with that, the details that are shown in the service logs are pretty great in order to understand like exactly what's going on, right? So I can see how long the call took to make, what time it was made, who it was made by, what the HTTP status code of the request that was made, along with, as we showed before, the request body and the response body. So to get back to the problem at hand, I'm trying to figure out.
Actually, sorry, I hate to interrupt you again. I'm just
Yep.
like, I love like this. I just love this tool so much, and service log so much. But like you just mentioned, like you can see the response time, right? And you can see the response codes. I mean, how many times I know I've had it happen at Uncork and at other places where an end user or a client tells you this, the site is slow. It's taking a long time to do something. Isn't it always great when you can go point to somebody else? Not to say you want to walk around finger pointing, but hey, isn't it great when you could say, oh, the problem's not me, it's the movie database. You're telling me it takes 2 seconds for an action to complete, and I'm able to show you that it took 1.5 seconds for the movie database to give me back the data. So, I think when it comes to troubleshooting performance issues, you can actually see, and if you could, Russell, actually, if you could just close this out and go to the charts, you could see response times as well. And the more logs you load, the more data points you get here. So you can watch as external APIs, how on average how fast are they performing, on over time how fast have they been performing. Maybe there's been a slowdown. So when you're getting questions about performance and reliability, this gives you that window to say, hey, we probably have a lot of dependencies in our system. And where are the bottlenecks in each of those dependencies? And it might still be within your configuration. It might still be within your code if you're coding. But anytime you can rule out the external systems and you have all this data now for you, it makes the case very simple to say, all right, well, this service that we're calling, maybe that's the problem, not anything that you built over here. So, the list goes on, man.
Right. And maybe, to your example, the page takes 2 seconds to load, but maybe there's 10 different services being ran and all of them take 0.001 milliseconds, but one takes that 1.995 milliseconds to run, or 1.995 seconds to run. And, that one call is the one bogging down the entire page from loading. So it helps you kind of identify what needs to be optimized, what process needs to be optimized in here to make things more efficient.
Yeah, totally. And I don't think we need to dig into it here, but correct me if I'm wrong. Can't you also look at all the requests that were like triggered by a given request? So to your point, like let's say you make one call, that spawns off 10 other ones. You can encapsulate those together, almost like effectively like a session, right?
Yeah, definitely. So the user interface is just calling one API module. So there's no chaining going on. But if this API module called another API module that called another API module, you can actually track that entire chain of calls using this root service log ID and parent service log ID to find what the originating call was from and then what called this direct API module as well. So some pretty, useful tools to dive in and understand the root cause of something.
Sweet.
Great. So this information is great to show me what data was getting returned to me from the response body. So I can see here, well, not in this one actually, but if I look at the most recent one without this filter, then I should be able to see that. Right. So now I don't have that average rating field here. So this tells me that average rating field isn't getting returned to me in the response body, but I still don't exactly know why it's not getting returned to me. So that's where this debug execution process really comes in handy here. So I'm going to step into this functionality. So what this does is it actually gives you a glimpse into the execution that ran in order, like for this log here. So this network call was ran at a certain time. And I'm able to actually replay that call and step through it to see at each step what happened here. So I can go to the debugger and then see, right, step 0, new submission. So my initializer is getting set and triggered. In step 1, my initializer got executed and then triggered the plugin. In step 3, my plugin executed and set these fields. So I see that it ended at step 3. It ended with this plugin, but I built this API thinking the plugin's supposed to trigger the data workflow. Why did it stop? Sorry, not on there. Why did it stop at this plugin? Where's the data workflow? So now that I see that step 3 is the last step, the first thing I would do is, what's supposed to be triggering this? Why isn't it getting triggered? I would go into here and see, oh, post trigger is empty. I meant to put this data workflow in there. And now, saving. And now the expectation is once this plugin runs, this data workflow can run. I can quickly actually test that my logic is working properly by using the server-side execution button, which takes me to the server-side execute debugger. So this allows me to quickly test an API module and actually, just like the debugger, step through each step and validate the data that's being sent or set and the components that are being triggered. So I need to pass in the field that I would have passed through the front end. So let's say popularity.desc. And when I execute this, I now see this is my response. The results array comes back with those 20 movies that we're showing. And I now have this average rating field, which wasn't coming back when that post trigger wasn't there. If I click the debugger, it's going to look very similar to the replay that I see here, except what I should see is on step 3, just like on the replay, I see that the plugin was executed, but now I see that there's a 4th step, and this step 3 is triggering this data workflow. Step 4, the data workflow gets executed and then sets this average rating field to 6.6. So I was able to successfully use the service logs dashboard and the tools surrounding the service logs dashboard, like the server-side execution replay, to understand that a step was missing in my execution, and then identify where it needed to be set, and then actually go ahead, implement that, and then fix the problem at hand. So now that we've debugged this issue successfully and we have a working application again, I'd like to create some tests to make sure that any future work doesn't break the existing work that I just did today. So with that, we will go to the testing dashboard. So the testing tool is a way to ensure that your application is functioning as intended. There's metrics here that show you your API coverage, your API success rate, your component coverage, and your component success rate as well. This also gives you real-time notifications that alert you as soon as your configuration broke an existing test. Also, currently, the only tests that we support on this tool are component tests and API tests, but we're looking to add more types of tests to include in this test suite in a future iteration of this tool.
Cool. Yeah, so obviously I was looking to move ahead, but so for the ones you have now, you said component tests and API tests. So would you say, look, I know we all love debugging. It could be a lot of, some of us love debugging. Some people really love debugging, but of course you don't want to do it, as you said, right? So that's where unit testing came from. So am I right? These component tests, it's like an automated unit test, almost in both sense, right?
Right, exactly, yes.
Right. So it's like, hey, like I said, I think if anyone saw a couple of the posts I made for this stream today, no code doesn't mean no developers. And it sure as heck doesn't mean no testing, and it sure as heck doesn't mean no debugging, right? You're building software here. We want to make sure that, you can catch these errors right up and you're following all these best practices. So, right. So we got unit tests coming. So like as folks are seeing what Russell's doing here, I mean, think about unit testing. I know there's a lot of engineers who might still be struggling to adapt to TDD and BDD based development, but it's a thing, right? And it's extremely important, and you have that in Uncork. API tests, like I think about consumer driven contract tests. Like you're promoting these APIs, you're sharing these APIs to to different consumers. It could be yourself, like you said, even in the service, like you saw how you can call module to module. It's external. That you might be offering up other systems access to the APIs that you create in Uncork. You have to make sure you don't break that, right? Just like we were joking before, sometimes it's great when you see a problem on your end and you can point to the movie database API as the problem. You'd never want that to happen on your side, right? You don't want anyone saying that you're the problem. And to me, this is one of the best ways, obviously, you can avoid getting yourself in those situations. Like, know the moment that it's down, know the moment that you broke it, both for your APIs, for those little, composable units that exist in your config. So, yeah, this is such a huge one. I'm excited for you to keep going.
Yeah, and definitely, and not just for like knowing when something breaks, but creating tests for these logic components also just helps as I'm configuring the components to test my logic and make sure that it's working as I'm expecting it to work, right? So
yeah, that actually, let me just that is huge, and I think it's so important that you brought that up, and we don't gloss over that. Like when you're looking, as Russell is taking you through this, right? It's in calcs, it's in data workflows. I mean, you can think about normal development patterns, right? You write some code or you do some no code, whatever it may be. You save it, you open your browser, you refresh, and you see what happens, right? Like this is almost in a sense you're executing your code within your IDE, right? Like I don't need to, make some changes, write some code, do some config, add some formulas, preview it in my browser, refresh my browser, run through all the steps that I need to run through to get myself to the point where that, piece of logic is going to be executed, only to find out that it's wrong and then go back and try again. Like you're effectively just real time building within your IDE. I mean, that is talk about the time savings that a developer gets by being able to do that versus that endless cycle of save, refresh, save, refresh.
yeah, I can't emphasize enough how much time I've lost prior to this coming out of saving something and then getting to the point of where I can test it and then realizing I messed up and then having to go back. And yeah, it's the time saved is infinite.
Yeah, I mean, like you've saved time in Uncork since this came out. Uncork was already saving you time with from if you coded it. So like when you see the metrics that we talk about in terms of the increased productivity with a platform like Uncork, I mean you get that baseline productivity gains, and now you're seeing features like this, more and more like this come out that is just going to push that gain even further and further and further. It's incredible.
Absolutely. Great. So for the testing, the component tests, or what we call unit tests, happen directly in the module itself. So Nick kind of alluded to this, but tests can only be created in the logic components, which are calculators, decisions, and data workflows currently. So as you see here, I have a calculator, a decision, and a data workflow. So let's populate some tests. If we go back to here, this is my rating threshold. Actually, let me refresh because I fixed this module now. So now I have the average rating again. This is my threshold, and this is my average rating. If the average rating is less than the threshold, then I'm getting this thumbs down. If the average rating is greater than or equal to the threshold, then I get this thumbs up here. And that logic's driven by this calculator component here, right? So average rating and rating threshold. So I can make a few tests to ensure that the logic is successful. So as I just described, if the average rating is greater than or equal to the threshold, then this status field should be passed, otherwise fail. So if my movie rating threshold is a 7 and my average rating is a 9, I would expect a pass. I'm going to add another test. If my average rating is a 5 and my threshold is a 7, then I would expect a fail. And lastly, let's do the edge case where if the average rating is a 7 and my rating threshold is a 7, then based on the logic, since it's greater than or equal to, I would imagine that this would be a pass. And let me run all the tests. And as you see, nothing here, all of these tests were successful. If a test failed, then I would see this red indicator here telling me that my test failed. So all of my tests have passed successfully here. And now I feel confident that this calculator have these tests working. And if for some reason the logic were to change or something were to break, I would be notified that the expected business logic of the average rating needs to be greater than or equal to this for a pass isn't working properly anymore. So that's for the calculator. For the decision's pretty similar, where based on that status that I just set in the calculator, I have that icon field that's either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So this thumbs up icon or this thumbs down icon, right? So I only want the icon to show the thumbs up if there's a pass, and I only want the thumbs down to show if there's a fail. So I have this decision component with the input of the status. The output is the thumbs up icon and the thumbs down icon, both the visibility I'm controlling. So if the status is a pass, then I want the thumbs up to be visible, yes, and the thumbs down to not be visible. If the status is a fail, then I want the thumbs up to not be visible and the thumbs down to be visible. So I can create a couple tests for that too. So if it's a pass, if it's a fail, and then if it's anything else, I don't know why it would be set to something else, but let's say it gets set to ABC for some reason. So if it's a pass, then I would expect the thumbs up to be visible, yes, and thumbs down to be no. Reverse for this. So if it's a fail, then thumbs up should not be shown, but thumbs down should be. And if there's any other status based on this logic, it would fall into this case where both things would be not visible. So I'm going to say no, and I'm going to run the logic. And everything is passing here in this calculator test. So I'm going to save this now. And last but not least, the data workflow test. So data workflows, I think, are known to be the most complex components in Uncork. It takes a long time to really master the data workflow because there's so much to it. But there's definitely some tips and tricks in order to make your debugging of data workflows much quicker. As Nick said, when you're working and then saving and then going to the module and previewing it, then realizing that can get really tedious when you're trying to configure a complex data workflow. So something that was added to the data workflow, which makes this a lot easier of a process, is that the tests in the data workflow, which I actually are already populated, but when the tests run, they run the logic, and I can actually console out some of the whatever I'm outputting, and it gets displayed directly in my console rather than having to run it in Express. So if I want to test this logic, I can put this console here, add the data to my tests, and then when I run this test, that console gets ran and displayed directly in Module Builder. So I can click here, see the data that comes back, and then change it in a way that's needed if this wasn't the expected result, or if it was, then I know I'm good and ready to move on. So just the fact that you can run the console in the browser, in the Module Builder browser, and not have to open an Express instance and get to the point of when this data workflow runs is a huge time saver.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're an engineer, you're probably very familiar with console.log, and I mean, it's effectively that, right? And inspecting your data at any point during a series of execution. I mean, I think I messaged some of the people who are involved in this, and I know you were very involved in this work, and said this has been one of the hugest features that I've seen in Uncork, just in terms of what you can do. Because like you said, those data workflows, as you remember previous Twitches, where I was parsing or aggregating complex data from a video game, you do some wild stuff in there, and that's a huge one. So
yep. So we have populated our component tests, and so now I'm ready to create an API test, or a few API tests maybe, for this API module to ensure that this is working properly. So I'm going to go back to the tool, find the app that I'm looking for, so the movie list app. When I'm on the movie list app, now I can see metrics about the modules within this application. So I see my API module has 0% test coverage because I never added a test to it yet. And my my UI module, the module that I just added test to, has some type of coverage to it, right? So I can see that here. Then I don't think I actually saved that module, so I might have lost the tests. Let's see. If I refresh, I should see them. Cool. So the component tests, or the component tests have saved now. I can see that my component coverage is 100% because every testable unit in this module is tested. I had 3 logic components that were eligible to be tested, and I have tests in all 3 of them. So my component coverage is 100%. And from those tests that are configured, they're all passing. So that's why I see 100% here too. So that was for the component test that I've created. Now I want to create an API test. So I'm going to go to my API module and click this Create API Test button. And now it brings me to the screen where I can populate information about my API test. So as you see, a lot of this information already got pre-populated. What it does is it takes the last successful service log execution and pre-populates the request and the response with that data. The reason for that is it saves time. If I needed to create an API test, I could enter the requests, but theoretically, if I already had a successful run, then I might just want to use that as a benchmark moving forward and then create tests based on that successful execution. I don't need to go with this, right? So this is popularity.desc. Maybe I don't want to test popularity and I want to test revenue. That's fine. I can change this, refresh the response, and now got different response back based on the revenue instead of popularity. This is really just to accelerate the process of filling this data out. I can choose up to the last 10 service logs or just free form enter the request here directly. So now there's 3 different types of API tests I want to talk about. There is the execution sequence test. So this is very similar to the server-side execution debugger in the sense that it shows you the components and the steps that each component gets executed on. This is basically taking that exact data and just making sure that the components are getting triggered at the proper step, right? So on step 1, the initializer gets triggered. On step 2, the plugin gets triggered. On step 3, the data workflow gets triggered, and so on. So that makes sense for a majority of the tests because based on that request, the process of how it goes through the module typically wouldn't change. Maybe the data changes, but this isn't checking for the data. This is strictly making sure that the execution of the components is happening at the proper steps.
Right. So any conditionals, let's say you had different request bodies, which might trigger different sequence of events or different paths of execution. You could have a test for each, and then the execution sequence could be different, and you'll just account for those scenarios.
Exactly.
Right?
So if I had a decision where if sort by was revenue, then it would trigger component A, and if sort by was popularity, it would trigger component B. I would create a test for revenue where I'm making sure that when revenue is passed, component A is triggered, and then if popularity, then component B must be triggered. So that would be 2 different tests, but exactly, you can test the different decision trees and make sure that based on the specific input, then the proper decision tree is cool. Being executed.
Yeah, and just to add to I know that could be hard for some people, right? Like you have to write tests. How do you know the world of tests that you need? The various permutations of inputs and outputs that might result in different, that might end up in a different result, right? So I know it's not in here right now. There's this other concept in Uncork called cyclomatic complexity, not really just in Uncork, but that Uncork is used called cyclomatic complexity. And going back to the codeless stuff, right? We have this codeless standard. We have this structured representation of your logic. And with that, you can determine cyclomatic complexity, which for the folks who don't know is effectively, the number of different logical paths that a set of logic can take, right? So in theory, your cyclomatic complexity is more or less 1-to-1 to the number of test cases you probably need. If there's an if-else statement, there's two potential paths. Therefore, you should have, and that's a cyclomatic complexity of 2. So therefore, you should have 2 tests. So there's some other tools we're going to talk about later on in the UDLC that exposes some of that cyclomatic complexity data. There's APIs, you can pull it back yourself, and it can be a great tool to help you maybe figure out, or even just using service logs to see the varying different data that you've sent in, what kind of, or how many test cases you should be building here. Not to say we're always gonna, but again, using the power of Codeless to help you make the most informed decisions about managing your applications.
Right. So the next type of test is the match response test. So the match response test, what that does is it takes the based on the specific request that I passed in, it takes an expected response that I give it here, and it compares the expected response to the actual response that gets returned from the execution every single time it runs. So this is just doing a normal JSON diff, comparing 2 different JSON objects and making sure that nothing's changed about them. This test is really only useful for specific instances. This would not be useful for this API module because I'm pulling back a list of movies at a given time, right? So right now in 2022, Avatar is the #1 movie in revenue, right? But if we tried to do this again next year, then maybe Avatar is not the highest, has the highest revenue. So I wouldn't want to do a match response because I'm basically saying, based on this request, Avatar should always be the first movie in this list, when that's not the case. The list is always going to be changing. So a match response doesn't really make sense in this case. Where match response does make sense would be something like if your API module is doing some kind of data transformation where I'm sending in some JSON object in a certain format, and that API module is massaging that data and transforming it in a certain way or a certain format, and then outputting it in a different format. So based on this request, the response should always look like this, right? That's when this test is most valuable. Definitely not for this type of API module. But what is valuable for this type of API module would be the validate fields test. So similar to match response, it takes the response body that comes back from the execution, but instead of matching the entire response, you can pick and choose certain fields that you want to validate with different types of validation tests. So let's say that I don't care what the first movie in the results array that comes back is, but I just want to make sure that the results array has, at least 1 movie in it, right? So I can say I want to validate that the results size is greater than 0, right? So that basically, and I didn't give it a name. So let's say validating fields, and yeah, so I want to make sure that the results size is greater than 0. I also have that other field, that average rating field. So maybe I want to make sure that, right, if this is the highest revenue movies, then the average rating shouldn't be less than, I don't know, a 4, let's say arbitrarily, right? So I want to make sure this average rating field has a value that is greater than 4. So 7.4 is greater than 4, so this should pass. But
well, I mean, look, I'll tell you one thing. If there's anything I've seen about movies, just the amount of money it makes is no indication of how good it is. But yeah, no, totally. And I guess another thing you could do here is check if it exists, right? Because I remember in the beginning you had a problem because it wasn't in the API, so you can do an exist check here. The moment it no longer exists because you forget that trigger, I don't want to spoil the surprise that you will be told immediately when you've broken something, but I just try to relate it back to that, the problem you created earlier.
Yeah, certainly. So, and I'm going to be recreating that problem again shortly, so don't you worry, Nick. Cool. So this validate fields test is pretty accurate for what I'm trying to test with my API module. So I'm going to save this test, and that execution sequence test that I explained earlier, that actually gets set by default. A user could remove this, but we figured that in about, I don't know, pulling this number the error, but 99% of use cases could probably use this execution sequence test in the API module. So we pre-populate this test to make it easy to just go in, create a test, and move on. So I'm just going to give it a name to indicate what it is. So execution sequence. And I'm going to be creating these two tests now for this API module. So I'm going to go ahead and create the tests. And now the tests are created. My API coverage and my API success rate are 100%. And then I can see those two tests right here. So I can go into it, view the API tests, see the details that I gave it, see the result of the execution. So when this just ran, this is the response that shows up. These are the tests that I'm validating. So average rating is greater than 4. Check, it's 7.4, and then the results array has a size greater than 0, which is correct because there's an array with at least one object in there. So the size is greater than 0. I can also, similarly to the server-side execute or the replay, I can step through the execution and see what's happening at each step, where the values are being set, right? So on step there's a lot of data here, but on step 3, I'm passing in all this stuff. Then step 4 is where the average rating field is being set to 7.4. So this is great. Now I have a test. I have 2 tests configured for this module. So let's say, 2 weeks later, I realize that there's a new feature that needs to be added or a bug that I need to fix. So I go into my module and I start working on it. So let's say someone new comes in and they don't really know, the lay of the land in this module. And they're like, why is this field here? Let me delete it, right? So they go ahead and they delete that post trigger. And when you click save, so this testing tool actually on the back end right now, every test for this module is being executed. And if the status of the test has changed, so if a previously passing test is now failed or a previously failing test is now passed, I'm actually going to get notified via email right away that I broke my test. So if I check my emails right now, I can see that I have a unit test notification for this submission ID. And it tells me that 2 previously passing tests are now failing. And I can click this link to go to the unit test dashboard and see why my tests are failing. Gotta log in. So now I can go in and I see that my validate fields test is failing and my execution sequence test is failing. And then I can understand why when I go here and click result. And I see the results array is still greater than 0. That's correct. But what I skipped was that data workflow that sets this average rating field. So I don't actually have that average rating field in here, which it would show up like right here. So average rating is not greater than 4 anymore. It doesn't exist, which is why this is a failure. So I just got notified that I broke my configuration. I saw that and I say, oops, I didn't mean to break it. Let me just, put that data workflow back. So I can add this data workflow back, save. The tests are getting re-executed automatically on every module save. And if I check my email one last time, now I got another email that says 2 previously failing tests are now passing. And if I go back to the dashboard, now they're going to show me that the tests are passing again. So I was able to remediate an issue as soon as it came up, not, after it went live and some client reported an issue or something, but as soon as I clicked save on the module, I got notified that an issue arose, was able to take care of that issue, and now my tests are passing again. Obviously, sometimes there's some new business logic that comes up that might cause a test to no longer be accurate, right? Like maybe maybe that average rating field, right? I said it needs to be greater than 4. Nick said that some movies are not good, and they, just because the revenue is high doesn't mean they're good. And whoever I'm building this app for says we need to change this rating. Instead of a 4, we're looking at a 2 now. So, right, like that's just a change in the business logic. Doesn't mean that the test is or the module is necessarily failing. It's just the acceptance criteria has changed a little bit. So I could go in and then just update this test and say, all right, instead of 4, let me change it to 2, and then save it. And then now maybe all the tests are passing if there was a movie there that lowered the average rating or something.
Yeah. Awesome. So that was amazing. Can you do one more thing? Can you show how, you said it's running automatically, right? How are these, and this is all built with Uncork, right? So how are you running these tests automatically?
Thank you for asking. So the tests are being ran through a workflow specifically using the signal start node. So what the signal start node does is it looks for a specific event in the environment. The event that we're looking for particularly for this tool is on module save for all modules. So anytime any module in the environment gets saved, this workflow kicks off and it executes this API module, which basically just checks, does this module have any tests existing for it? If it does not, then it just ends there and it doesn't do anything. If it does have a test existing for it, it runs those tests, it re-executes all those tests that you've configured, and then it checks the status and if there's been a status change. So if a test was previously passing and now failing, then it's going to update some status that says we need to notify this person that they broke their test, and vice versa. If it was failing and now passing, they're going to send a notification. What it doesn't do, which I think people are going to be happy about, is it doesn't annoy you every single time you broke a test and keep clicking save without the status changing, right? So maybe I broke the test once on purpose because I'm in the middle of adding a lot of new logic. Every time I click save, it's not going to say, hey, you broke a test. Hey, you broke a test. Hey, you broke a test. I know I broke the test. I'm trying to fix it, right? So it's really only going to notify you once the status changes as like a one-time thing. And as soon as the status flips back, it'll notify you. But then as I continue to pass a test or fail a test, it's not going to tell me every single time.
Yeah, very, very smart. Otherwise, people would create labels or create filters in Gmail to send those immediately to trash, and you don't get the value, right? So that's awesome. That signal start node. I mean, that was so exciting when that came about in Uncork. Like the start of a pub sub framework where you can really start to automate more and more of your SDLC. I mean, think about CI/CD, DevOps, DevSecOps. Like there's so many processes and paradigms here that you can start to really realize. You showed me promotions is another one. Hey, every time an application is promoted, do something. Heck, even a module save. Like in theory, this could be adjusted to say, because like we talked about TDD, you showed us building something and then writing tests. Some folks will say you should write the tests and then build. So that you could do that in Uncork too. Drag a calculator component in, write your tests out, then go up and start to write your formulas, and your calculator is not done until you get the expected result. Like true test driven development, like you start with the test and you go forward. Like imagine you do that in Uncork. You build the module with all the tests first, so then all your tests fail to start, and then you have a signal start node that says you even can adjust this and say, hey, if the tests pass, promote it to the higher environment. Like the most continuous integration you can manage it on Uncork, where do your test first. Once the tests succeed, promote it. Every time the test succeeds, promote it. I'm not suggesting folks do that necessarily, but these are the things you can do with this. You can do something where every time you are committing working configuration into Uncork, you're promoting, and your QA can start on it immediately. And the use cases for these signal starts and all of this whole pub sub is huge. So right on. That's amazing. Anything else you wanted to add on testing or service logs?
No, that was it for my demo.
Cool. So actually, we got a question. We got a question from one of our viewers. So, is this workflow always running?
It's always listening. Yes. So when you have the signal, when you have a workflow and it's running, right? So yes, it's always running. It's always listening. The second that a module gets saved, it's going to then fire and then trigger this. But in short, yes, it is always running.
Yeah, it's a subscriber to the event that gets published of module save. Great question. Good clarification. Thank you, viewer. Cool. So since we're wrapping up, you showed some great tools. Like as a parting sentiment, we talked about a lot in the UDLC, obviously all today and the last time. If you could just like as a developer, particularly even an Uncork developer, um, in your own words, like what does the UDLC mean to you as a creator? What has it meant to you in your time at Uncork?
Great question. So using the UDLC toolkit in conjunction with Uncork is a lot like playing Mario Kart with those steer control settings on, right? So without those settings, you can get through the course. You might hit some bumps, you might fall off the edge a few times, but in the end, you're still going to cross the finish line. But with the UDLC toolkit or with the steer assist on, it just kind of helps guide you seamlessly through that process, gets you to the finish line nice and efficiently, maybe taking some shortcuts, but just making sure you don't really fall off the rails there. So I think that would be my best analogy of using the UDLC toolkit with Uncork.
All right, cool. I love it. I love the video game analogy. On Twitch, it makes so much sense. And yeah, it's funny. So I play Mario Kart, with my girlfriend a lot too. And so it's kind of like, look, Uncork, you can build so many different things, right? You can build anything from this little POC that you built all the way up to a mission critical application for engineering. And like, I don't know, you can play Mario Kart and everything from 50 to 200 cc. So, right, maybe in a doing a POC, doing a prototype, that's a 50 cc race. Maybe you don't need steer assist for that. Maybe you don't need all these, bells and whistles. We don't want to discourage people from rapidly innovating on top of our platform. But on the flip side, you're racing 200 cc. If you're not getting some guidance and assisted and visibility and governance of the way that you're racing, I guarantee you're going to fly off. You're going to fly off the course numerous times. I know I've done it a lot, at least in Mario Kart, not in Uncork because of the UDLC and really just all of the Uncork features. I don't want to say that it's only the UDLC. Again, we're focusing on the UDLC because they're built with Uncork, and this is a channel to really show you about the power of what you can build with Uncork. Please don't take that to mean that the rest of Uncork isn't chock full of SDLC capabilities and features that make sure that you are doing things in the best possible way and leveraging codeless and that standard and everything that we can do with it to help you get there. I do see one other question. I wanted to end on the note, but I do see one question. I want to make sure our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Want to make sure a question hit. Can you customize the notification?
Yeah, you can make it do whatever you want, right? So all this is doing is listening for an event, and then you can use the power of Uncork to do whatever you want with it. You can send an email, a customized email. You can send a text message. You can send a Slack or a tweet or whatever integration you want to create. You can do that as long as you build it in Uncork and you have the workflow just execute some API module that hooks into whatever process or integration you're looking to do to send that notification.
Yeah, and just remember, folks, like these things are built with Uncork. If you have an Uncork environment, all of these tools are open source for you, right? You log into your environment, you can see the configuration. Just like you might go into GitHub and fork a repository and go make your own changes to it, copy this application into a new application, fork it, and do whatever you want with it. There's no stopping what you can do, with the power of like open source SDLC tools in Uncork. So thank you everybody for joining. Russell, big thank you for coming here and covering two extremely important tools, extremely valuable tools in the arsenal for developers. I hope this made a ton of sense to folks. I'm sure that you understand the pains that we're talking about and the processes that Russell covered for you. So again, thanks again, Russell. I wanted to say goodbye to everybody.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nick. And it was great being here. I hope to join you again sometime in the near future.
Sounds awesome. It's been a lot of fun having guests on. So and as I said, folks, every Thursday now, 3 p.m. So I will see all of you in exactly whatever 24 times 7 is. So ciao.